This video was scripted, recorded, and halfway edited by the time of E3 2018. Don't worry, I'll mention the Rivals debacle at the end.
We are going to have to act if we want to live in a different world.
When I initially started scripting this video, I wanted to look at if EA were to release a new Command & Conquer game, what kind of game would it need to be? Nothing hopeful, nothing expecting an actual new game from EA, just pure wishful thinking. You know, the music, the units, setting, bringing back Joe and retconning that game. As you probably know if you're watching this, Command & Conquer is pretty much dead. If Dune 2 was the granddaddy of RTSs, the Wolfenstein 3D of its genre, then Command & Conquer was Doom. First released by Westwood Studios in 1995, the early CnC games are PC classics, and with Dune, laid the foundations for real-time strategy. And then, in 2003, following a spin-off that didn't impress, and in light of Westwood's unrealistic ambitions, parent company EA liquidated Westwood Studios. When I initially started scripting this video, I didn't plan on using it to bash EA. That wasn't my intention. Even as a lifelong fan of the Westwood games, I still enjoy the few games EA LA put out under the CnC name. Tib Wars was pretty good. Kane's Wrath, excellent. Red Alert 3 and Uprising, good work. Generals, not for me, but it has its fans. To their credit, EA LA, for the most part, did a good job. I wanted to make a point in the original script that not one spin-off or significant departure from the series' core roots has been successful. And so I looked into it. CnC has a lot of cancelled titles, only one of which, to my knowledge, would have been a core standard entry. CnC 3 Incursion would have been Westwood's third major entry to the Tiberium universe, a direct sequel to Tiberium Sun and Firestorm. Development on Incursion was halted in favour of a planned Command & Conquer MMO called Continuum, though both were cancelled upon Westwood's termination. Tiberium Wars grew from the remnants of Incursion. Beyond that, every other cancelled, failed, or otherwise bad entry under the CnC name was a spin-off. This was going to be my point. If EA were to release a new CnC game, it would have to be a core classic RTS. During my research, I started to look closer at these significant departures, and it was kind of depressing. Let's go through them. The first spin-off was Soul Survivor. Released in 1997 following Red Alert: The Aftermath, Soul Survivor uses assets from the first Command & Conquer, but instead of controlling a base and an army, the player has only one unit, and must explore the map to power up. It's been described as an early example of a MOBA, releasing a whole 5 years before Defense of the Ancients, but I think that's a bit generous. Soul Survivor was a sort of online multiplayer experiment in a time when not everyone had access to the internet. It was a minigame released as a standalone. It didn't fail without reason. Renegade is probably the most well-known spin-off, and although it played a part in the closure of Westwood Studios, it is still remembered fondly by its fans. The first of several attempts to bring CnC to the lucrative FPS genre, and the only one to be released. It's still an enjoyable game, but you can tell that it wasn't made by a team well versed in FPSs. Between Renegade and Earth and Beyond, EA got cold feet. Renegade 2 was in development when the studio was closed, looking like more of the same, but in the Red Alert universe. Continuum we've already mentioned. A planned MMO set in the Tiberium universe, the available concept art paints a picture pretty far removed from Command & Conquer. I can't say I'm not intrigued by a CnC MMO, but I also can't see how that would work without stripping out everything but the faction names. I'm also not sure how Westwood was planning to maintain both Continuum and Earth and Beyond on top of their other projects. Lofty ambitions. Tiberium was to be EA's crack at the FPS genre. The material on it looks 1 part intriguing to 2 parts bland, generic sci-fi shooter. Renegade was like a love letter to the first CnC. A love letter scrawled in crayon, but the sentiment was there. Tiberium looked like it had little in the way of heart. Tib Wars, and certainly Kane's Wrath, did a great job recapturing the thematic essence of earlier games, but I can't see any of that here. You traverse an awesome Tiberium-infested hellscape and see the enormous threshold off in the background, followed by generic hallways, generic soldiers, generic sci-fi gun, and some bare-bones squad mechanics that don't really look all that fun. Still, Tiberium is an incredibly important title, as the cancellation announcement proves conclusively that yes, EA does indeed have standards. A small collection of CnC games were released for mobile devices, which were, well, I can't really say whether they were good or bad. They've all been removed. Looking at them, they seem pretty unremarkable. RTSs are not made for tiny touchscreens. Still, their inception is reasonably inoffensive, given that these mobile games were tie-ins to contemporary full releases. Doesn't change the fact that they were clearly naked cash grabs with little in the way of substance. Project Camacho was a new one to me. It appears it was to be an FPS in the Generals universe, and boy, if you thought Tiberium looked generic. The title was cancelled in favour of Spielberg joint game LMNO, which was also later cancelled. CnC Arena did actually release, of course, just not under that name. I'd like to quote former EA LA dev Greg Black in his interview with GameReplays.org. The important thing to know is that CnC4 was never meant to be a true Tiberium Universe canonical game, but rather an experiment in online play. It originally started out as an Asian market online-only version of CnC3. At some point, the company executives decided it made the most business sense to add a single-player campaign, call it CnC4, and put it in a box. The team of course protested this change in direction, but the decision stood. The team did what they could to make a good game, given the realities inside EA, but ultimately it was a product of a dysfunctional corporate culture. Those quality standards of EA's seem not to be quite so high as previously claimed. Following that train wreck, EA did what they do best and closed EA LA, which then became Danger Close Games and went on to develop the Medal of Honor reboots until EA closed them again. In the meantime, Visceral Games was given the CnC IP, but was quickly taken back so that EA could close them. A new company was set up, called Victory Games, to handle the Command & Conquer brand. They're closed now. Victory Games were developing Generals 2, which was promising. Generals is a good blank canvas relatable world, you're not stepping on the toes of earlier works. Base building is back, good stuff. Then it was announced it would be free to play. Alarm bells rang. Oh, and it won't have a campaign, but it will, just months down the line. I quite like this quote from Polygon here, that Frank Gibeau, then president of EA Labels, quote, thinks Electronic Arts can help dispel the misconception some people have about free-to-play titles with this release. You didn't, EA. You really didn't. Generals 2 was renamed around this point to just Command & Conquer. I'm sorry, we already had a game called Command & Conquer. You can agree with this practice or not, but there is a time and a place for releasing a new game with just the franchise's title. Reboots, retreads, sure, I can see the value in doing this. Doom, for instance, made total sense. This game is not Command & Conquer. It would never have been Command & Conquer. It could have been a Command & Conquer, but even after the name change, it was still Generals 2. It was set in the Generals universe, not in the Tiberium one. A Tib Dawn remake, sure, you can call that just Command & Conquer, but not if it's in a side universe, not if it's missing single player, and not if it's a free-to-play service. I was up for a new Generals game, but having the temerity to call this first game from a new studio just Command & Conquer after the disaster that was Tib Twilight was an outright insult to the first game and to its fans. But of course, it's not really your IP, is it, EA? It was someone else's, so who cares if it's treated disrespectfully? In the end, the game was cancelled due to fan feedback, they said. The press release line was total BS. It was not any feedback from the alpha that shut this project down, but just petty corporate politics and shenanigans. please enjoy the live game until they figure out how to turn off the servers. It might be a while. The final CnC game to be released was Tiberium Alliances, a stripped-back, browser-based, money-hungry, free-to-play insult to the legacy of Command & Conquer. A Red Alert variant was in the works as well, before EA realised they hadn't closed any companies that day. So between Westwood Studios, Westwood Pacific, EA LA, who were then Danger Close Games when they were subsumed into DICE LA, Victory Games, and now EA Phenomic, that's 5 companies EA closed immediately following a CnC spin-off. After Phenomic's closure, Easy Studios was brought in to support Alliances, and I bet you'll never guess what happened to them. Alliances is your typical monetization via energy system fare, and is currently the only game on the main CnC website other than a link to Origin. I've gotta say, we're a long way from where we started. Oh, and you can see how little EA actually cares about Tib Alliances. I put the name into Google, and at the time of writing, this is what I got. But don't worry, they've got standards. There were also a few browser games on a game site called Pogo, but the one that really struck a chord with me, the most egregious and flagrant thumbbite to the legacy of Command & Conquer, was CnC Battle. It was the discovery of this farce that made me ask myself, do I really want to see another CnC game? Of course I do, but clearly EA cannot be trusted. Clearly EA hasn't got a clue how to handle the IPs they've acquired over the years. The fact that CnC Battle was cancelled and never released does nothing to mitigate the fact that it was ever actually seriously conceptualised in the first place. This is what the owner of the IP thinks Command & Conquer should be. CnC Battle, from the little we know, was to be a tablet game set in the Tiberium universe and, quoting translated French, a visibly play-for-free game with integrated purchases. The starkly unusual graphics are ripped wholesale from an earlier EA 2D game called AWOL, a one-button game for Facebook. EA evidently looked at this seminal masterpiece, this magnum opus, this pinnacle of interactive artistry, and they thought to themselves, we could slap the Command & Conquer brand on this. Much of the backstory came from the creative imagination of Brett Sperry and A.D. Larimore, quote John Bostic. Joe Kukin, in an interview with Imperium Westwood, briefly recalled the origins of Kane's beloved Brotherhood. The Brotherhood of Nod was an invention of original CnC designer A.D. Larimore. She and I spent hours discussing biblical metaphor and imagined backstory. This is where EA decided to take the Brotherhood of Nod. This is how little they care about the intellectual properties they lay their hands on. This is the miserable state of the once great Command & Conquer. Without Westwood Studios, without Westwood Pacific, without even EA LA. This is the pitiful whimper of the cadaver of Command & Conquer, as EA wring it out for as much money as they can. I mean, CnC Battle was at least cancelled before release. It's a shame the same can't be said for Alliances, which is the exact same pathetic play-for-free business practice, just with a different coat of paint. When you can go to a genre-defining franchise's official website and just see a browser-based spin-off, you know it's dead. Frankly, the less EA even mentions the name, the better, because they have proven themselves utterly incapable of handling it. EA have proven time and time again that they haven't got a clue how to handle the franchises they take from the companies they erase. After the developer EA LA absorbed the remnants of Westwood Pacific, then EA Pacific, they were tasked with making an RTS for The Lord of the Rings, using the Westwood 3D engine as a base. Following the Battle for Middle-earth's release, EA LA's employees sued EA for enforcing, quote, extreme crunch time during development. According to Wikipedia, the developer released 2 other games in the same year and had at minimum 1 release per year since 1996, up until the failure of Tib Twilight. The employees won the lawsuit, but EA learned absolutely nothing from this slap on the wrist. Lead balance designer Greg Black had this to say when he initially left the company in 2009. For me, CnC was something of a sacred game, and I desperately wanted to do the series justice with all the CnC games I worked on. Unfortunately, although we had a very talented team of passionate gamers, EA simply would not give us the time we felt we needed to make a truly great CnC game. In the case of CnC 3, our development cycle was something like 11 months. Compare that to Blizzard or Relic, who were spending 3 to 6 years on their RTS titles. Our longest development cycle was 18 months on Red Alert 3, but at that time the team was split in half and added another platform, PS3, so the extra dev time was kind of a wash. EA simply needed us to keep cranking out games to keep the LA studio afloat, while many of its other teams floundered. Our games were always rushed, our engine technology aged and degraded over the years, our pathfinding was horrible, our online implementations were embarrassing, and ultimately our games did not, in my view, live up to the original CnC, or Red Alert 2, or Generals. Unfortunately, the gamer who just spent $50 on our games doesn't have any clue how much time we had to spend on them, or what the internal politics of EA were at the time. They can only see what is in the box. EA had broken many promises to us and was continuing to make bad decisions at the expense of the CnC franchise and over the protests of the development teams. I just needed a break from the EA insanity. This is where Tib Twilight came into the picture. A poor decision from on high, and suddenly a franchise is dead to everyone. The one final attempt at resuscitation was in the form of Generals 2, which ended due to petty corporate politics and shenanigans. Really not sounding all that different. Because after all, the game doesn't matter to EA. The prestige once held by the franchise they bought in the 90s is irrelevant. So too is the customer, unless they are of the mindless Facebook-glued masses pawing absently at the fingerprint-smeared glass before them, obediently inserting their credit card when requested. That's what Command & Conquer has become. One more stolen name to put on their half-arsed, rushed-out-the-door drivel. When I initially started scripting this video, I wanted to look at, if EA were to release a new Command & Conquer game, what kind of game would it be? I couldn't finish that script, because I realised very early on that I no longer wanted a new Command & Conquer game. I have grown up with CnC, I loved the games, but I couldn't bear to see another entry. I really can't, because even before loot boxes were rampant, EA couldn't be trusted with it. In the making of this video, I started off with realistic pessimism tinged with momentary flighty hopes that one day... I no longer hope that that day comes. Not with EA at the helm. It's entirely possible that they may decide to release a new RTS under that name, but it won't be CnC. It'll be another Alliances, another Tib Twilight, God forbid another Battle. Command & Conquer is an embarrassment, and we all know who is to blame. I take no pleasure in doing sad, angry or ranty videos, and I'm sorry this probably isn't the ending you were hoping for. According to Wikipedia, the last word on CnC's future was that as of 2014, EA was still seeking a new developer to carry the torch. But given that 7 companies that we know of have been closed following contact with Command & Conquer, it's unsurprising no one would want to touch it with a barge pole. As of the time of writing, there has been no official word, though rumblings had begun back in November 2017 when Greg Black, now with several years of StarCraft at Blizzard under his belt, has returned to EA. No word yet regarding CnC. Addendum. I think I'm cursed. This is the 3rd scripted video I've attempted to make for this channel that has suddenly become outdated during production. In the course of editing a Smash Bros. Roster retrospective, a new Smash game was announced, so I'm having to work in an update for that. A video on the Master Chief Collection had to be scrapped entirely after development updates rendered many of its points moot. And now, most unexpectedly, after 4 years of absolute silence, just as I'm set to record this post-mortem, a new Command & Conquer game has been announced. And somehow, it's worse than I had projected. This is worse than Federation Force. At least Federation Force managed to be a decent game despite its ire. That, and Nintendo didn't acquire the Metroid IP by prying it from the stiff hands of a dead developer. Licensed by EA, Red Alert Online is being developed by Tencent Games for the Chinese mobile market. It doesn't even have the common decency of being regular old bat. In reusing and recreating assets from Red Alert 2, Online seriously tugs at those nostalgic heartstrings. Earlier in this script, I almost made note of the fact that Red Alert on iPhone reused Red Alert 2 era designs alongside new and Red Alert 3 ones. Online is shameless in its asset ripping. Alliances only besmirched Tib Wars, but Red Alert 2 was the pinnacle, the franchise at its finest. The last CnC RTS to carry Westwood's name. To hear those old voice lines coming from a Chinese-only mobile game is crushing. When you harken back so directly to previous titles, you are paying homage to the works that came before, and you are paying homage to the fans of those titles. This is beyond a slap in the face. If you enjoyed Red Alert 2, EA have just put your face between their crack and said pull my finger. I watched the trailer. You can see War Miners, Harriers, Kirovs calling back to the Red Alert 2 intro, Apox, Patriots, and Yuri. It's been the better part of a decade since the last RTS release, and we get all this in a mobile game. Developed by a company that only cares for making as much money as possible off of screen-prodding Luddites, and licensed by the company that just doesn't care at all. Yeah, the one company EA couldn't close. I'm not sure how I can explain it for people not familiar with CnC, but imagine Nintendo announces a Clash of Clans rip-off full to the brim with microtransactions, under the Earthbound name, using art and sounds direct from Mother 3, and it'll only be available in Spain. You may be halfway there, since this bypasses the years of drivel from EA we've had to put up with. This is worse than what I had envisioned. I was borderline concerned my script up until now might have been a tad overzealous, but then I saw this trailer and I wanted to weep for the state this beloved franchise had gotten into. I weep for Command & Conquer. There is nothing left now. There is no way back from this. I mentioned Alliances was an insult. I don't know how they did it. This is worse. Congratulations, EA. I had no idea a dead franchise could be ground so deeply into the mud, but to your credit, you found a way. So, if there's a game or franchise you've not heard from in a while, let me know in the comments. I'll write a video about it, and halfway through, we'll suddenly get an update. Stay tuned for my retrospective on F-Zero. Looking forward to it. Addendum 2. I cannot believe I have to write this, but everything I've said thus far pales in comparison to what we saw at E3 2018. Show video.
And give you your first look at a brand new mobile game in a live, winner-take-all, head-to-head match.
Command & Conquer Mobile.
Sure thing.
Oh, please
the
no.
objective is straightforward. Destroy the opponent's base to win. Unit control?
No.
Super simple. Just tap.
No, do
tap
not
destination,
you dare.
Unit automatically moves there. The most efficient way to destroy the opponent's base is with this giant nuclear missile in the center of the map.
It looks like it. It looks like it.
The control controls
That
the
looks
missile.
like
When the bar
nods.
fills up, we'll fire the missile.
That looks like the Temple Nod on the right.
Destroy
Don't
the
you...
enemy's base and
That's... Oh my god, that's totally...
Sounds great, Michael.
Oh my
Enough
god.
talking about it. Let's get to this match.
Absolutely.
All right,
It's
ladies
Command
and
&
gentlemen, we have an
Conquer.
awesome
Oh,
matchup lined
God.
up for you here today.
Greg Black, you went back to EA for
His
this?
opponent,
Yes, I can't wait.
This makes me so happy
Are
because
the
I love
players
how
ready?
distressed
Let's,
you're getting.
Oh,
get this thing
this
going.
is... I'm sorry, this is genuine. I am
said Command
crushed.
& Conquer
Kick this
Mobile
off,
as a joke
nice
to
little
wind you
strategy
up.
Game for those
Yes.
of you out there. It's a good genre. I'm very excited.
Yeah,
for
it's a
this.
good
The players
genre.
are
You
loading
killed.
in, and we are scissors
What the
here.
hell has happened to the
Through
Command
south
& Conquer
side, that missile
franchise?
passing halfway now. Both
there it is.
zone- two zones
Okay.
in
This is
control.
what happens when
Tonight,
EA
we will have
buys
the
a
missiles we see
company,
at first
takes
point
their
before
IPs
taking
and
control
closes them.
Let's see if
This is the shite they come out
get
with.
around to that.
Skitty, I'm in the middle of editing a video, which I'm probably going to have to scrap now. There's like a 20, 30-minute documentary on where Command & Conquer went wrong. And this was my conclusion. Like, I had one thing that I wanted from EA, and that was the lack of Command & Conquer. Because EA cannot be trusted.
But now you can take the documentary and finish it with me saying it's Command & Conquer Mobile and you just losing your shit.
Command & Conquer for a new generation.
I could go on, but I think at this point everything that needs to be said has been said. It's kind of weird going back through this script with hindsight. I originally, as I say, started with the hope that EA would just forget that CnC ever existed. Because I couldn't stand to see what new ways EA would find to bastardize a beloved name. I started writing this sometime in mid-April, after years of information drought, and in the time since I started recording this script, one cancel game has been discovered, what looks like an earlier attempt at Rivals circa 2014, and 2 mobile titles have been announced, completely dwarfing the earlier projects that had incensed me enough to hope that one of my favourite franchises in gaming would stay dead. I wasn't happy to find out about CnC Battle, and that's kind of where this whole video stemmed from. But looking at Rivals, that's all it is. Yeah, visually it looks a lot better, although anything would look better than asset flipping a Facebook game, let's be honest. But it's become clear that this is what EA wanted all along. They wanted CnC to be free to play, they wanted it to be on mobile, and they wanted to fill it with all the scummy business practices that have made them so very rich and so very despised. Well, where do we go from there? With every edit I had to make to this script, the ending just kept getting bleaker and bleaker, and I really don't want to end this video like that. Thing is, try as they might, EA can't take away the old games. There may be a little in the way of a future to Command, but you can still conquer the past. If you want to play CnC and never got round to it, here's a video on how you can get each CnC game working on your PC, link below. Quick synopsis, the first few are free, the later games are on Steam. If you've caught this video early, they're actually on sale at the moment, and the middle ones are a bit trickier to find if you want to avoid Origin. And while you're at it, have a look at OpenRA, a modern fan engine running Tibdawn, Red Alert and Dune 2K, all free and balanced for competitive multiplayer. Check out YouTuber FiveAces, who does some stellar OpenRA shoutcasting. While it seems Command & Conquer may have died back in 2010, it is thanks to the work of an incredible fan base that the series truly lives on. Not in new releases, but in the celebration and the preservation of the old. Command & Conquer belongs to the fans now. My name is Stefan. Thank you so much for watching.
Brotherhood! We are whole again! The sickness has been cut out! In the name of Cain! In the name of Cain! In the name of Cain! Cain lives!
Rule of thumb, Hassan. You can't kill the Messiah.